Think about the first thing you do after waking up. You grab your phone, you scroll. Maybe you check a notification that says your card was charged. It's a small amount, so you don't really react. Then you get up, grab breakfast, head into your day, and life moves on. Nothing about that morning feels expensive. Now fast forward a year. That same routine, the same tiny decisions, the same habits you never question, has quietly cost you more than one big purchase ever would. And the scary part? You never felt it happening. That's how most people lose money in real life. Not through bad math. Not because they're irresponsible, but because daily habits blend into the background. They feel normal. They feel earned. They feel justified. No one ever sits down and decides, I'm going to waste thousands of dollars this year. It happens because we repeat small behaviors without ever adding them up. This video is about those behaviors, not extreme examples, not rich people problems. I'm talking about normal, everyday habits, the kind you do while half awake, the kind you don't even remember doing later, things that feel too small to matter. Until you zoom out, as we go through this, you're probably going to catch yourself thinking, wait, I do that. That's a good thing. Because once you see these habits clearly, they lose their power. And that's when your money finally starts working the way you expect it to. Let's get into it. Let's start with something that almost nobody thinks of as a money habit. Because it doesn't feel like spending. It doesn't even feel like a decision. It's the habit of saying yes by default. You don't sit down and plan it. You don't budget for it. It just happens because it's easier than stopping to think. You open an app and the card is already saved. You're at the store and the more expensive option is right there at eye level. You're tired, you're busy, you've had a long day, and your brain quietly says, it's fine. It's not that much. And honestly, in that moment, it isn't. $5 doesn't feel like a problem. $10 doesn't feel like a mistake. Even $15 doesn't trigger alarm bells. That's why this habit survives for years. Think about how often you choose the easier option without realizing it. The faster option, the closer option, the one that saves you a little time or a little mental effort. You're not being careless. You're being human. But here's the part most people never zoom out far enough to see. When convenience becomes automatic, cost becomes invisible. Take something as simple as food, not fancy dining, not celebrations, just normal everyday eating. You didn't plan to overspend, but you just didn't plan at all. And when there's no plan, convenience fills the gap. You grab something on the way instead of making something at home. You add a side you didn't really want because it's already there. You pay a little extra because standing in another line feels annoying. None of these choices feel wrong on their own, but when you repeat them day after day, week after week, something strange happens. Your baseline shifts. What used to feel like extra now feels normal, and what used to feel expensive now feels expected. This is where the money leak starts. Not because you're reckless, but because your brain is wired to protect energy, not money. Your brain loves shortcuts. It loves routines. Once something becomes familiar, it stops questioning it. That's why you don't remember half the spending you do in a month. It didn't register as a moment worth remembering. And that's dangerous. Not dramatically, but quietly. Because when spending doesn't feel like spending, it never feels urgent to fix. Most people think financial change starts with motivation, or discipline, or willpower. But it actually starts with noticing. Noticing how often you say yes without checking the price. Noticing how rarely you pause before tapping confirm. Noticing how convenience slowly trains you to accept higher costs as normal life. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If you added up every small, it's fine moment from a year, not the big stuff, just the forgettable stuff, the number would surprise you. Not because it's shocking in any one place, but because it's spread out so evenly you never felt it. That's why people feel confused about their money. They're not lying when they say, I don't know where it went. They genuinely don't, because nothing stood out. And this habit doesn't just affect spending, it affects how you think about money. When everything is small, nothing feels worth changing. When nothing feels urgent, nothing improves. So the goal here isn't to stop enjoying convenience. That's unrealistic. The goal is to interrupt autopilot, just enough to make spending visible again. Because once you see it clearly, you can decide, consciously, what's actually worth paying for, and what's just been happening by default. And in the next part, there's a big difference between spending money and losing awareness of it. Those small, easy yes moments that don't feel like decisions. But this habit takes it one step further. This is what happens when money leaves your account, and you're not even part of the conversation. Think about how often you actually approve a charge anymore. not tap a button, not glance at a notification. I mean, genuinely decide. Most of the time you don't. A charge shows up after the fact. You see it in your bank app, maybe while you're waiting in line or brushing your teeth, and you think, oh yeah, that, and then you move on. No frustration, no alarm, just acceptance. That's how automatic spending rewires your relationship with money. It doesn't feel like spending, it feels like background noise. At first, automatic payments feel helpful. They remove effort. They promise convenience. They protect you from forgetting things. And for a while, that's true. But slowly, something changes. You stop checking. You stop remembering why you signed up. You stop asking whether it still fits your life. Because nothing is asking you. The charge just keeps coming. What makes this habit so powerful isn't the amount. It's the timing. Money leaving at predictable intervals fades into the rhythm of life. It blends in with rent, utilities, groceries, everything else that feels unavoidable. And once something feels unavoidable, you stop questioning it. Here's what people don't talk about enough. Automatic spending creates emotional distance. When you manually pay for something, there's friction. You feel it, even for a second. But when something renews quietly in the background, there's no moment of pain. No pause, no chance to reconsider. And when there's no pause, there's no change. That's why people keep paying for things they don't use. Not because they're lazy or careless, but because the decision already happened in the past, and now they're just living with it. Think about how many things in your life are still charging you for a version of you that no longer exists. A routine you don't have anymore. A schedule that changed. An interest that faded. The money didn't get the memo. And the longer something runs automatically, the harder it feels to stop it. Not practically and emotionally. Canceling feels like effort. Like admitting you were wrong. Like reopening a decision you thought was done. So people tell themselves, I'll deal with it later. Later rarely comes. What's dangerous here isn't the money itself. It's the mindset it creates. When spending happens without your attention, you start to feel like money is something that happens to you, not something you actively direct. That's when people feel powerless with their finances. They're not overspending dramatically, they're just not present. And here's the part that really matters. When money leaves automatically, it becomes very easy to underestimate how much flexibility you actually have. You start believing your situation is tighter than it really is. You assume there's no room to breathe, no space to adjust, when in reality, a lot of that pressure is self-created through habits you've never revisited. Awareness changes that, not by cutting everything, not by forcing yourself into extremes, but by bringing decisions back into the present. Because the moment you start seeing money move again, consciously, you regain control. And control changes behavior faster than guilt ever could. There's a habit that almost everyone protects. Not because it's smart, not because it's efficient, but because it feels personal. This is the habit of spending to change how you feel. Not to solve a problem, not because you planned it, but because something inside you wants relief, or comfort, or a reward. And before you think, that's not me, slow down for a second. This habit doesn't show up as a big, obvious emotional moment. It shows up quietly, woven into normal life. After a long day, after a stressful conversation, after a week where everything felt heavy. You don't announce it. You don't justify it out loud. You just think, I deserve this. And in that moment, it feels true. You worked hard. You dealt with things. You held it together. So you allow yourself something small, something familiar, something that promises to make the day feel lighter. And again, the amount doesn't feel dangerous. That's why this habit is so hard to notice. Because it doesn't feel irresponsible. It feels earned. Over time, this turns into a pattern. Stress happens. You spend. Relief follows. Your brain remembers that connection. And the next time stress shows up, spending feels like a solution. Not logically, emotionally. This is where money stops being a tool and starts becoming a coping mechanism. And the tricky part? No one ever tells you to stop enjoying life. So this habit hides in plain sight. It blends into self-care language, into motivation culture, into the idea that you shouldn't be too hard on yourself, and you shouldn't be. But here's the quiet truth most people never confront. When spending becomes the primary way you deal with discomfort, it slowly trains you to leak money whenever life feels difficult. And life feels difficult often. Think about how many moments in a week carry low-level stress. Not dramatic stress, just friction, traffic, deadlines, decisions, noise, fatigue. You don't even register it consciously, but your body feels it, And your brain remembers what worked last time. So you spend on food you didn't plan, on small upgrades you didn't need, on things that feel like a break even if they don't last. Each time the relief is temporary, but the habit sticks. What makes this habit expensive isn't any single purchase. It's repetition. It's frequency. It's how often emotion shows up and asks for something in return. And because the spending feels justified, you don't question it. You defend it. You say things like, it's just how I unwind, or this is my one thing, or at least I'm not spending on worse stuff. And maybe that's true, but money doesn't care about justification. It only responds to patterns. Over time, these emotional purchases quietly raise your baseline spending. What used to feel like a treat becomes routine. What used to be occasional becomes expected. And when it becomes expected, you start budgeting around it, even if you never formally write it down. This is how people get stuck. Not broke in a dramatic way, just tight, just stretched, just always feeling like there should be more left than there is. And here's the part that surprises people. This habit doesn't just affect your bank account, it affects how you think about progress. When money is constantly used to smooth emotions, it becomes harder to save, not because you don't want to, but because saving doesn't offer immediate relief. It doesn't give you that same emotional feedback loop, so spending wins by default. That's why advice like just budget better rarely sticks. It ignores the emotional role money is playing. You can't out-discipline a habit you haven't understood. The shift doesn't come from never spending emotionally again. That's unrealistic. The shift comes from noticing when emotion is driving the decision and giving yourself a pause. Not to judge, not to deny, just to ask, is this solving the feeling or just delaying it? That question alone changes behavior, because once you see the pattern, you realize something important. You don't need to eliminate joy to improve your finances. You just need to stop using money as your primary emotional regulator. When you do that, spending becomes intentional again. And intentional spending feels different. It feels lighter, cleaner, less regretful. And now, with all three habits in view, autopilot convenience, automatic money movement, and emotional spending, the picture becomes clear. None of these habits are about being bad with money. They're about being human in a system designed to take advantage of that. If you step back and look at everything we've talked about, there's a pattern hiding in plain sight. None of these habits started as mistakes. They started as solutions. Convenience helped you get through busy days. Automation helped you avoid forgetting things. Small rewards helped you cope with stress. Each habit made sense at the time. The problem wasn't the choice, it was never revisiting it. Life changes, schedules shift, energy levels drop, priorities evolve. But habits tend to stay exactly where they were created, and when no one asks you to update them, they keep operating in the background as if nothing has changed. That's why so many people feel stuck financially without knowing why. They're not reckless. They're not irresponsible. They're just living with old patterns in a new reality. What actually moves the needle isn't cutting everything or forcing yourself into strict rules. It's something much quieter. It's awareness. Awareness brings spending back into the present moment. It turns automatic behavior into conscious choice. And once something becomes a choice again, it stops controlling you. This doesn't mean your life has to become smaller. In many cases, it becomes lighter, less cluttered, less noisy. Because money stops leaking into places that no longer matter to you. And here's something important. Progress doesn't come from fixing everything at once. That's not how real change works. It comes from noticing one habit, one pattern, one moment where you used to say yes without thinking, and pausing just long enough to decide differently. That pause is powerful, not because it saves you money immediately, but because it restores agency. And agency changes behavior faster than guilt ever could. When you start operating from awareness instead of autopilot, something shifts. You feel more in control even before the numbers change. And when the numbers do change, it doesn't feel forced. It feels earned. That's the kind of financial progress that actually lasts. If this video made you think differently about even one small habit, then it did its job. You don't need to overhaul your life. You don't need extreme discipline. You just need to see what's been happening quietly and decide what deserves your money going forward. That's it. If you found this helpful, take a second to like the video. It helps more than you might think. And if you want more content like this, practical, grounded, and focused on real life, consider subscribing. Drop a comment with one habit you noticed today. Not to judge yourself, just to acknowledge it. Awareness always starts there. Thanks for watching.